Dr. Hamilton's work did not begin with attempting to prove that consciousness continues after death. He had heard of the Patience Worth Ouija board writings from his friend Dr. Allison. Dr. Allison had spoken in his home church after himself visiting with Mrs. Curran and seeing firsthand how the writings were being produced. In October and November of 1918, Dr. Hamilton and his friend and pastor, Dr. McLaughlin, decided to investigate the possibility of telepathic communication, and were soon convinced that such communication did in fact exist. During those experiments, a prophecy came in the form of a voice that seemed to come from within Dr. Hamilton's mind, that predicted that he would do work that would echo around the world and prove the continuation of consciousness beyond death. He was so shocked by this phenomenon, being a devout Presbyterian, that he and his friend decided that somehow wicked forces had entered their work, and that this work must be stopped immediately to preserve both their sanity and the future destination of their souls. He spent the next 3 days in bed, incapacitated by worry and doubting his own sanity, while his wife Lillian, a registered nurse, plied him with sedatives. He stopped all work for the time being. He was determined that this was to be the end of his investigations into the psychic realms. However, early on the evening of October 20, 1920, 3 people unexpectedly dropped into the Hamilton home for a chat. They were Mr. Ernest Court, a well-read Englishman, Assistant Secretary of the Manitoba Medical Society, and his school-aged daughter. There was also their little Scots friend, Mrs. Elizabeth Poole, who had long been regarded as a member of the Hamilton family, but who knew nothing of psychical research or spiritualism, and who had had very little education, in fact just enough to allow her to do a little ciphering, read books of the adolescent type, and write legible letters, although often the words were misspelled and punctuation marks were absent. During the evening, quite by chance, Mr. Court introduced the subject of psychical research, regarding which he knew the Hamiltons had some interest. He asked if they had ever tried table tipping, an old parlor game, which he had seen done in the old country, and which he had himself experienced once, and which, now and then, he said, brought to light various mind products not easily explained along any known, normal orthodox lines, and in some cases even gave out communications evidential of certain dead people. Intrigued by Mr. Court's description of the results sometimes obtained by this simple experiment, they brought a small wooden table, about the size of an ordinary piano bench, into the room. To their utter astonishment, as they sat on the 4 sides of the small table, with their fingertips lightly touching its surface, the table became agitated as if in the hand of a giant. Soon it began to pound up and down in tilts on 2 legs in a most aggressive and decided manner. Mr. Court suggested that Dr. Hamilton repeat the alphabet. This he did, calling out A, B, C, D over and over, with the table tilting to indicate the appropriate letter. Lillian's mother, Mrs. John Forrester, took down the indicated letters. Then the process was repeated. It was a laborious and time-consuming way to receive messages. After a few minutes, the table stopped. Lights were turned up, and the message studied. The table had tipped out a message purportedly from Myers, who claimed to be the chief spokesman. Plato, Book 10, Allegory very true. Read Lodge. Trust his religious sense. Myers. Myers and Stead are here. Stead answers doctor's questions. The Hamiltons had no acquaintance with the works of Plato. They did not know at the time of the sitting that the Republic had 10 books, but they had read Myers's Human Personality and Its Survival of Bodily Death. They were the only sitters who realized the significance of the name, mentally asking, Can this be the Myers? Myers appeared to be saying that in his new state as a discarnate, he found these teachings to be very true. He also added that he was being helped to communicate by the famous journalist W.T. Stead, who had died as one of the passengers when the Titanic went down in 1912. The Hamiltons knew about Lodge and his belief in life after death and the possibility of communication between the two states under certain rather particular circumstances. They also knew about Myers, but of Plato they knew nothing. Myers had written in the 1890s about dreams, hallucination, creativity and genius, hysteria, multiple personality, apparitions, trance mediumship, automatic writing, telepathy, and hypnosis. All of these phenomena involved what Myers called automatisms, that is, the coming into consciousness of latent subliminal materials or motor processes that were allowed to emerge because the normal waking consciousness barriers had become more unstable and permeable. Myers produced a theory of the subliminal self. In his theory, our normal waking consciousness is but a small subset of the larger individuality or self. It is the environment that calls forth the specific aspects of the unconscious that will emerge to respond to the circumstances of ordinary life. This interpretation was very different from the conceptions of Freud's model of repression. Freud and others viewed these subliminal phenomena as abnormal or unhealthy. Myers believed that all these phenomena are the outworking of a basic psychological process, namely the loosening of the barriers between the unconscious and the conscious areas of mind. Encouraged by the evidentiality of the so-called Myers message, Dr. Hamilton and Lillian occasionally held table sittings with the same little group. The theory being that as this group had functioned once successfully as a sort of composite medium, then perhaps other important results might be obtained. There the matter stood in early 1921. Lillian had found time to read W.J. Crawford's books dealing with the phenomena of materialization. She wondered if possibly little Mrs. Poole might have a potential similar to that demonstrated by Crawford's medium, Kathleen Gallagher. As Mrs. Poole was a most obliging and dear soul, she readily agreed to sit occasionally with Lillian. About once a month, starting in February of 1921, the two ladies met and sat quietly in a darkened room on the second floor of the Hamilton home. Again, the table behaved in that same strange manner, tilting away from Mrs. Poole, striking the floor in a regular rhythm, up, down, tilt, bang. At this time, in spite of the demands of a large private practice and much committee work, Dr. Hamilton's interest in psychic phenomena was again growing. Fully aware of the general public's attitude of scorn and derision directed towards anyone showing interest in such matters, and rightly fearful lest his professional reputation be tarnished if his own interest were to become known, Dr. Hamilton kept his interest a closely guarded confidence between very close friends.